Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Lunch and Learn session in the Norfolk Green Care Festival. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nigel Boldrow. I'm the convener of the Norfolk Green Care Network that's been organising this year's festival, our second year of doing this. If you're interested in finding out more about the festival and what's going on in the remaining few days, go to our website, which is ngcn.uk. And if you're also interested in joining the network, you'd be very welcome to do that. There's no cost involved. And if you have an interest or involvement in Nature Connection for promoting health and well-being and a healthier planet, we'd love you to join us. So please follow that up if you wish. I'm very pleased to welcome Rob Black today, who's an ecotherapist, a psychotherapist, and we'll say a bit more about himself in a moment. This is an interesting session for us because it sort of, as the title suggests, taking a slightly different and perhaps deeper angle on the benefits of nature connection. And I'm really interested to hearing more about what Rob's got to tell us and the work of Bill Plotkin. As I said, if you can stay on mute unless you want to ask a question or unless you're speaking, I think we'll have opportunities for reflections and questions all the way through the session with Rob, and hopefully there'll be time at the end. And if you can either put your hand up in the necessary sort of virtual way by clicking on the hand at the bottom or putting your hand up on screen, I'm sure we can handle that either way. So without further ado, over to you, Rob. Welcome.
Thanks, Nigel. It's really good to be here. I'm really glad everyone can join us today. Just to say, the Norfolk Green Care Network is really a very special organisation, and so I really do recommend people get involved. It's a great thing. So I'm as Nigel said, I'm a psychotherapist now based in Suffolk. I was based in Norwich for a long time till recently, but I also still keep a room there. But I've had this long-term interest in nature and spending time in nature and the therapeutic benefits of nature. So I've been involved with becoming more engaged with nature for quite a few years now. I've been running retreats in the natural world. Let's see, probably about 7 or 8 years now. We just finished a 5-day retreat in North Norfolk about a week ago. So one of my particular interests is more on the depth side of things, as Nigel mentioned. So this is basically coming out of the tradition of Jungian psychology, and the particular work of Bill Plotkin this time. He's done a great job of re-articulating the work in a way that is more nature-based. So I wanted to share some of his insights about how this all works. And as Nigel said, there'll be time for roughly halfway through. We'll have a break for some questions, and then later we'll have some time at the end also. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Might just need me a second to get this up. So now it'll just take me a second to get this showing. It's, of course, slideshow. There we go. Is that okay there, Nigel? Brilliant. Thanks. Okay. So I'm going to move straight on onto this slide here, the human journey. So a big part of what Bill Plotkin has been mapping and exploring through his work is the human journey of development and growth. And so he has mapped it onto a north, south, east, west way of sort of understanding or seeing the world, as you can see on this image that I'm sharing here. Nature-based communities have done this ever since the beginning of time, as far as we can understand, and this is sort of you could say the latest rendition of this way of seeing things, a way of understanding things. You can see in the east, he's put birth there, and obviously human development begins at that point, moves into childhood, as he shows there. We move around to the south, with puberty, which is the transition into adolescence, what we call adolescence. Then it starts to get a little bit different, the way that he sees the world and the way he frames things slightly differently, which is very important for his way of doing things. Soul initiation is the necessary step to come into true adulthood. So it's true, obviously, biologically we can become adults, but he says we can't become psychologically or spiritually adult until we've been through what he calls soul initiation. Then he goes further around process, what he calls crowning, into elderhood before death, around the end there. So let me share a little bit then about what this means. So our culture basically does sort of an okay job of raising children and educating children to help us become part of our culture, which is the job of child rearing, so we can sort of get by in the world we're born into. That it gets a little bit trickier once we get round to adolescence, because what he says, adolescence is actually a time for where we should be learning more about ourselves and gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves, and to the point where we might enter this stage that he calls soul initiation. And this is the area that I'm going to say more about, because he says this is the major problem of our culture and why we find ourselves in the ecological crisis that we're in. So he frames the ecological crisis as a crisis of a lack of adults in the world, a lack of adults who have stepped into a sense of being that is more that comes from a deeper place within, where we've found out something deeper inside ourselves, where we can move from something rather than just an egocentric or a way of being that's centered just on myself. So this is a sort of a fairly sort of dismal picture of that you can see on the screen right now. It's a sort of a dismal picture of how development is often sort of portrayed in a quite a negative sense in our culture. So sort of the worst side of our culture does childhood like this. So it talks about obedience training and entitlement training, which I think sort of speaks for itself. Quite a lot of child rearing can be mainly about teaching kids just to do what they're told. Primary socioeconomic training is basically what he calls the next step that we often get caught in. So this is basically the idea that in a sense, we go to school, we learn how to sort of plug ourselves into the economy that we already have, and how to sort of be a good cog in that machine. and sort of to do what we're told. You know, the idea of when a bell rings, you jump up and go and do the next thing. You know, obviously, this is a very sort of the negative side, just to reiterate that. The next stage, which would be at the beginning of adolescence in a sort of a healthy and whole community. In the structure we've got now, it quite often encourages conforming, just to, again, sort of doing what we're told, which of course often leads to some kids will just start the rebellion side of things. So rather than going inside and finding out who we really are, we find ourselves either fighting against the system or just going along with the system for an easy ride, which leads to the next stage, which he says would be soul initiation, or the process of discovering who we really are. I will explain that term in just a second. But he says that what we find when we find ourselves in this place, we often have what he calls secession, which is basically a sort of a process of giving up, and which leads to what he calls soul suppression. So I'm just going to leave that there, because there's a lot more obviously we could do, but we've only got a very limited time. So I'm just going to try and cover this first little section in the time we have, up to the point of where we might reach soul initiation. So I'm going to explain his term soul now, which obviously is a term that's used in lots of different ways in different contexts. So I'm not saying any particular definition is right or wrong. This is just the word I'm using this time to use to specify what I'm talking about right here. So Bill Plotkin says this: the soul is a person's unique purpose or identity, what he calls a mythopoetic identity, something much deeper than personality or social vocational role. An identity revealed and expressed through symbol and metaphor, image and dream, archetype and myth. So in a sense, it's if you're not used to words like this, it's more I would suggest sort of more of an intuitive sense of what this might mean. If you imagine a dream, say, there's also often people relate to their dreams as something mysterious and difficult to understand. And in this type of work, we use the imagination as a way of getting in contact with what this deeper meaning might be. And I'll give you a little taste of that in a short while. So do be making notes of any questions that come up, because I'll give you a moment in a few minutes to ask any questions about what I'm talking about. I'm just going to say a little bit more about other ways you might understand soul in this context. Soul is the particular ecological niche or place a person was born to occupy, but may or may not ever discover or consciously embody it. So in a sense, I often think of it in terms of like an acorn. Like, what's in an acorn that knows that it will become an enormous tree in time? There's some sort of blueprint inside that acorn. And so the idea is that we are all born as an acorn with an image inside us, which looks a bit like a tree. You could say our own individual life. So here's more poetically speaking. There's a poet called David White that explores these types of images, this type of work. And soul is, in quotes here, the largest conversation you're capable of having with the world. You could say your oak tree. your sense of as big as you could get, or it's your own truth at the center of the image you were born with, or it's the shape that waits in the seed of you to grow and spread its branches against a future sky. And sometimes I explain it simply as your individual puzzle piece in the great mystery. If all of life is a great mystery, what's our part in all of life? What's our ecological niche? What's our puzzle piece? So this is the process of this type of work, is to start to uncover that, start to get to know that. How do we find it? So I mentioned some earlier stages in life, the stages of childhood and early adolescence. Once we've finished those stages, or once we have completed those enough, the soul, or psyche, Greek word for soul is psyche, the psyche knows, and it starts to come through in dreams, in images, in people we meet, in those chance encounters that happen. So it starts to find its way into your life, into your being. So this includes healing past wounds, developing life skills, the ability to get by in life. So this will start to, in a sense, let you know that the time is coming. You'll be called. And the way Bill Plotkin puts it is the call to wander. So there's this, I don't know about you, but what happened to me when I was in my sort of mid-teens is I got a call to wander. And for me, it became very external. I had to leave the life I'd been leading, and I went out into the world. And for me, I moved to a whole different country and sort of started the process of unfolding who I was. That I only understood it in retrospect once I started to understand this type of work. But that's what I did very naturally. No one told me about soul work. I just started looking and exploring. So different ways of doing that: dream work and deep imagery. If you know where to look and what you're looking for, you can start to look in your dreams. Deep imagery emerges through a process called active imagination, which is a Jungian process, because Carl Jung is one of the sort of forefathers of this type of work. Different types of meditation really help. Time in nature, so just immersing yourself in nature. All cultures have always had, ancient cultures that is, nature-based cultures have had rites of passage where you go out into nature and you find, and through the rites, through the structures that are offered in these old cultures, people would come back with insights into what they are, in this language, who they're meant to be in their culture, what is their gift that they could bring back to their community. There's this call to exotic travel, in a sense, and by exotic I mean to myself. And just to add in, my wife said, make sure you tell them you don't have to fly to do it. So you don't have to fly to do it. You can get on a train, which is the way I try to do it these days, to get out and learn something new about yourself through this journey and through travel, internally and externally. It's ways of learning about who you really are. So what I'd like to do is stop sharing for a second. And so that's really a whistle-stop tour of that type of work. But I wanted to give you a chance to put a couple of questions out there, if you did have any, to start to clarify this, because it's it might be language that's unusual to you. So give you a chance to have a go.
Thanks very much, Robert. A couple of people made a comment about the slides not showing up properly. That I think the right hand edge is missing off of them. But
oh, really?
so just have a look for when we go back to that, perhaps in a moment. But yeah, anyone, any reflections or questions for Robert from that first session? I am Tibbenham, whoever you are. Hello.
Yes, sorry, it's Irene. Sorry about the video.
Hi.
I don't know why, but my video hasn't worked on Zoom for the last 2 weeks. I'm not actually sure why.
No
Yeah,
problem.
it was just a question. When he talks about a person's unique purpose or identity, I mean, when I think of sort of purpose, I think of doing, and I would have thought when we talk about soul as such, where it's more about being than
Yes.
actually doing. So that kind of just put me off as the first part
Yeah.
of the definition.
Yeah.
Identity to me is about our sameness to other people, our similarity, and obviously that does come with culture and our
Yeah.
sense of belonging generally. So
Yeah,
yeah,
great. That's a
think
great,
I
it's a great point.
Okay, yeah. So
Could I sort of, yeah, do you mind if I comment on that?
yeah,
That's,
no, go ahead. Yes, yeah.
sort of, yeah, thank you. That's really a helpful clarification, because that's the sort of there's only so much I can sort of put into this time. So that's helpful to hear that. There is very much, I think, well, at my perception, and he would definitely say the same thing, that what you say is completely true. I would put it like, it's very much not a specific job or a specific, well, in a sense, we could be called to be a particular way in life, but it's more like the way that this language is talking is more like how we do it. It's how we do the thing that we do, rather than the thing in particular that we do. It will influence what we do, but it's not definitely that. Is that sort of how what you're imagining?
No, because I think I'm talking more about being.
Yeah.
Perhaps in terms of how we are, it's informed by many things: our genetics, our experience, our environment, our food, etc., etc. And there's so many things that feed into that, and what we do is one of those things.
Yeah.
But is from how he describes it sounds like it is more of a doing and like you said, vocational stuff. It sounds more like doing than actual everything that involves. Yeah, maybe I'm probably not making that clear.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of it gets tricky, doesn't it? Because there's a sort of, in order to embody one's soul, one has to do something, and it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it is, like he would very much say, it's a way of, it's not what you do, it's the blueprint about what the way that you do it, as much as anything else.
But that informs how you are, doesn't it? And obviously, because every single person is an absolutely individual person, everyone's individuality is sacrosanct. There is no one other person exactly like them, twins or not, because we can never duplicate that. So everyone is unique.
I wonder whether the key phrase, Robert, just to butt in, is that invitation to wander. And it's that to me suggests it's about you're in the world, and you're, in a sense, you're testing yourself out against the world and forming your soul through those interactions. And that's interactions with people, but it's interactions with the environment, etc. Is that right?
That's sort of in a sense, nature becomes a mirror in this type of work. So then the way this in a sense, you could say everything is ensouled in this way, in a sense, like, just like I used the example of an acorn in a sense, that sort of pattern, the pattern in the acorn that makes it its fullest self.
That's the genetics, though, isn't it? The genetic blueprint that an acorn has, and in the same way, all human beings are genetic.
Yeah. So maybe in a sense, there's
it's part of the information feeding into who we are, but again, it's only part of that information, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. So there's sort of, I guess, that's sort of where the metaphor starts to fall down in terms of human beings.
Sorry, I did.
Yeah. In terms of like what we're saying here is that one's soul unfolds in is something beyond genetics and beyond anything physical. Yeah. So, yeah. Sorry, Nigel.
Say there's a question from Louise in the chat. As the model is based on a human life cycle with different developmental stages, does he say that you can revisit earlier, i.e. chronologically, stages and redo them or heal them?
Definitely. Yeah, it's sort of you could say that these stages build one onto the next. So it's very much, you know, in a sense, you could say we all find ourselves falling back into sort of like a childlike state from time to time. That's just a natural human response to life. And then we get that's the moment we could step back and start to heal that side of things. I can actually I can actually go on to explore some of that a little bit more in a moment, if you like. Shall I take another question? If there are any more questions about soul, I can.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anything there?
Then I can move on to that sort of
move
work.
on then, Robert. Yes.
Okay. Let's see if my my sharing here will work better this time. Maybe I should have gotten you to do this, Nigel.
Don't worry. Do you want me to jump in, because I've actually got it down the bottom, I think, ready to go if it doesn't work.
Is that working?
That looks okay. Yeah. To me anyway.
Okay. Well, we'll run with this then for now, unless someone jumps into the chat and says something else.
Fine. Yeah, others are saying it's fine.
Okay. Wonderful. So, so having stated the problem with our culture being that, as a culture, we don't provide spaces where people can fully understand, get to know, and embody our souls. In fact, I've just said earlier that our culture suppresses soul. You can't sell products to people who really believe in themselves. So it's harder. So we find ourselves with this model here, and I'm gonna talk first of all about our human wholeness on the outside of this circle. So this is the nature-based map of the human psyche as a whole. So I'm just going to go through each of those. It won't make much sense until I start to explain each of these. And I'll start in the north, the nurturing generative adult. So the nurturing generative adult is this side of ourselves. So this is a side of our wholeness, a side of our potential way of being. Nurturing generative adult, embracing our own woundedness and immaturity, enabling a healing shift where our psyche as a whole is ready for it. So this is the side of ourselves where we can be compassionate and hold our inner experience when we're struggling, when we're stressed out. This is a sort of our ability to go inside and just give ourselves some kindly attention. So that's the nurturing side of it. And that happens on the inside of ourselves, and obviously it happens on the outside of ourselves, which is often easier when we can look after other people. This is that quality or that ability. This is the sort of other side of it, is the fostering wholeness in ourselves by contributing to the wholeness of things greater than ourselves. Nature, through our job or whatever it is that we offer to the world, offering support to neighbours or our community. This is our contribution. This is the generative side of the nurturing generative adult. So this is what we offer to the world. So it manifests during careful planning, designing, organising, preparing, dreaming up ideas, telling stories, creating art, building, all these sorts of elements. It's this side of ourselves. When we have a good, strong side of ourselves that's a nurturing generative adult, this is what's possible. Opposite that is what Bill Plotkin calls the wild indigenous one in the South. So this is quite different in terms of our own experience when we are fully and passionately at home in our human body and in the natural world. So if you think about our culture, it's quite head-based. We very much emphasize the ability to be in our head and to think. One of the biggest problems that I come across as a psychotherapist is people disconnecting from their experience in their heads. So the wild indigenous side of ourselves, our embodiment, is very rarely fully explored in our culture. Some people specialize in it, and that's fine, but our culture seems to particularly take us away from our embodiment. So embodied, sensuous, human-centered, body-centered human animal, our sexuality, our emotion, our playfulness. This is all, if you can sort of imagine that quality of our embodiedness. So here are some examples how you might make sense of this. You could say the ecstasy of chopping wood, carrying water, preparing a sumptuous meal, or savoring a long yoga posture. When you've got that good stretch that feels so good, when you really let yourself go into that. The rapture of sunshine, of flowers, fragrance. When you get lost inside that deep experience of nature, when you're really connected to a tree or a landscape. This is when we sense our belonging, our deepest belonging in any given place. So this is a sort of an amazing resource that so often we can miss out on. Becoming indigenous in the place we live. This is something I find particularly inspiring. So what does it mean to be indigenous? How would I be if I was to be indigenous in the place that I live? How would I be engaging with the natural world? How would I be engaging with the people around me? How would I be living my life if I was truly indigenous? So this is that side of us that knows how to be that way. That side of us that we can tap into and allow ourselves to be fully indigenous. So let's move to the East. The innocent / sage is how he talks about the East quality of our human being. So this is sort of he would use the term transpersonal in here, so it sort of goes beyond the personal. You could sort of say spiritual, So it's present-centered. When we're not ruminating on the past or future, this is like beginner's mind, the freshness of seeing, being in the present moment. You know, this is embodied in our culture through mindfulness practice. And, you know, obviously we get mindfulness practice through Buddhism, and all the sort of more these spiritual practices that come through Buddhism, through Sufism, through Taoism, all these different types of spiritual traditions around the world sort of present this way of being, sort of an innocence, this sort of freshness of seeing, which leads to sagacity, or the sage, the wisdom to see things as they are. So the transpersonal mysteries of light and the universal. This is the sort of big picture, the realm of pure consciousness beyond distinctions. This is the wisdom traditions of the world speak of this type of way of seeing, and offer practices that offer that sort of direction of insight. And so just I find the distinction between innocence and ignorance to be important. So in a sense that some people argue with the idea of innocence being insightful, because, you know, in a sense, if you think of a child, you know, there is this beautiful innocence about being in the present moment, but it's important to distinguish that from the ignorance that we do grow out of naturally. In a sense, there's a beautiful thing about a child, but children still need to learn about the world. But if we can hang on to that innocence that so often we lose in childhood, that helps us to see the world in a fresh way, continue that sort of ability to see clearly. And so I do realize that I'm flying through things very quickly, that each one is a quite a deep dive in itself. So my apologies for going through it so quickly. But again, I'll take some questions in a few moments here. So the term he uses for the West is what is muse beloved, and that's a very Jungian type term. So again, it'll take a little bit of unpacking. So that most of us might know the muse from Greek mythology. You know, it's sort of in our culture at this point. The muse, to muse, is to sort of gain insight through imagination. So the muse is like a source of inspiration, creativity, and deep imagination. So there's sort of, you can see what he's talking about as the West is the direction of the setting sun, and it's like where things get a little, you know, in the twilight, can't quite see things as clearly as we used to, and it gives rise to our imagination. We start to see things in the shadows. So he uses that, his term soul comes back in again. He talks about the West as being the guide to soul. Our westerly side of ourselves leads us toward our deepest reason for being. This takes us toward what I was just talking about in terms of soul initiation, finding out who we are in our deepest sense, in the most mysterious sense, that we can't find that without this sort of a deeper dive through the mysteries here. A Jungian term that's used is anima or animus. And that's the masculine or feminine of the soul. That literally means soul. Anima or animus literally means soul. And in a Jungian sense, a more masculine person will find they're attracted toward the feminine, and we can sort of find the other side of ourselves in what we talk about, either masculine or feminine, the opposite of the way we see ourselves already. The opposite being a common theme here, because it's sort of what we believe we are not. It's a common way of thinking. Whatever I believe I am not, I can get insights about my deeper self through that. You know, what we're drawn to he terms it in Jungian terms again, the inner beloved. This sort of if anyone reads the Sufi poets like Jalaluddin Rumi, Rumi is a great one who speaks about the beloved, and so in a sense you could talk about that as an inner experience. The beloved is sort of like the sacred side of ourselves that we have not yet quite found. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the wanderer, the wandering side of ourselves, the part of our psyche that wants to search, explore, go to places unknown and find ourselves mirrored back to ourselves there. So we muse on meanings, we get lost, we explore, and in the getting lost, we often have an adventure that helps us in some strange way find ourselves. It's like for me, the most obvious way that I've done this is by traveling in countries so different to where I grew up here in Suffolk. And I found in the traveling, I've somehow found something else about myself that I didn't know about me through those journeys into the unknown. Sort of inbuilt into our being to explore. So I think I should step back again and give you a chance to ask me what on earth I'm talking about.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone want to come in? If not, Irene, are you coming in? Yes, Irene, over to you.
Yeah, me again. Sorry.
Can't hear you very well.
Yeah.
I sit closer to the screen. It sounds very much like a classification system to me, and I don't really understand quite how that's connecting better with nature.
Good question. That's fantastic. Thanks for asking that clarification. So in a sense, the first piece of that really is that we can find all these elements, these four sides of what it means to be fully human, is also found everywhere in nature. So we can see it reflected back to ourselves. For example, we can see how, let's say, the nurturing, generative adult side of ourselves, nurturing and generativity, it happens all over the place. Especially this year, I'm in the process of rewilding a meadow in this area, and the trees have naturally started to, with all the water that's been finally this year. There's been some rain last year, my trees suffered. But this year they've just taken off. It's amazing. They've tripled in size in a matter of a couple of months. It's just unbelievable. And so this natural generativity in nature is reflecting back my own generativity. And let's say that's a very simple example. And I'm just trying to think of another one that might be reflected back to me. So let's just go to the west then. What I was just talking about, the evening, the twilight in the shadows, often it invites imagination. How many of us, I don't know if any of you have gone for a moonlit walk and suddenly you've gotten spooked out by as the imagination starts to get going in the shadows, and I know I can really get myself going there. And when I did, for example, I did a 5-day retreat with some of the people who lead this sort of course, and they had us go out into nature and spend all night out on our own. And basically the practice was to turn towards for me, it was like my mind made up this axe murderer coming from behind me, and they're going to just attack me or something. So my mind was going to crazy places like this, and I was just like, wow, okay, who is this person and what could they teach me? So in my imagination, then I engage with them, and I use my imagination to learn something about myself through that process. There's a sort of two simple examples.
Yeah, I'm conscious, Rob, of looking at each of those compass points, I put it that way, that there are elements of connecting with nature that come out quite clearly for me. I was going to ask, are you familiar with Miles Richardson's work at University of Derby?
I'm familiar with University of Derby's work, but I'm not sure.
Right. Well, he's I think he's a professor of psychology or something similar to that there, and he's just written a book called Reconnection, which you may have come across. Really recommend that as a read, because he is, I suppose, tackling similar ground to this, but in a slightly different way. I suppose another way of putting it would be he's mapping it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And he talks, I mean, I was conscious as you were going through that in terms of the North, you know, that nurturing aspect of life is very much about caring for nature. And that's part of what, you know, what we're about, isn't it? And likewise in the South, I think it was that phrase, doing stuff. It's sort of being in nature and doing stuff. It might be chopping wood, it might be, I don't know, sowing seeds or trimming a hedge or something. You know, again, that's something which is actively engaging with nature, which perhaps relates to that dimension. And then you went on to talk about the East and the sort of the sage, and particularly struck by what you said about a child's response to nature. And as you will know, we have this campaign called First Nature, which is all about in trying to encourage that connection with nature for children and young people, because I think we all recognise the benefits that they get from it. It's that sort of sense of wonder. You talked about innocence. I think it's that sort of I don't know, that sort of emotional response to seeing things in nature. I had a lovely example the other day. I did a blog about it on our website yesterday, I think it was, where I was parking up my car in Elsham to go shopping. I noticed this couple down on the ground with a mobile phone trying to take photographs. It looked like they're taking photographs of the road or something else. And anyway, I parked up, I came back, and I saw they were actually looking at this marvelous moth, brightly coloured. It turns out elephant hawk moth. And that sparked a fantastic conversation with them about that. And we looked it up on the internet and shared information, and then it led on to sort of discussions almost about, well, how are you doing with creating a meadow? It's a sort of a marvelous opportunity, but built on that sort of that sense of wonder at seeing this fantastic little beast. And then the final thing, the West you talk about, struck me again. One of the things that Miles talks about is about using the arts and creativity to interpret and get a deeper meaning from nature. And I guess in that again, I think is what you were talking about in terms of the West. So I can see some common strands, I suppose, saying with Miles Richardson's work. It's just he perhaps maps it in a slightly different way to the way that Bill Plotkin is, but it's touching the same areas, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of I guess I think Bill Plotkin's work is sort of seems to be aimed at a slightly different group of people, I suppose, maybe in a different way, and framing it in a slightly different way. So sort of very much the people I work with who are interested in this type of thing have often been engaged with a sort of quite a personal development type background and interest, and I think the example you're using there is sort of more focused on possibly more focused on direct relationship with nature and day-to-day type relationship with nature, you could say. Sounds like it's slightly different framing.
There's an interesting comment from Melanie in the chat. The way I'm seeing the link between these classifications and nature is that connecting with nature in different ways helps us develop through the human journey.
Yeah.
Come back on that at all, Rob?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that just looks like just going to read that again on here. I can open up the thing. The way I'm seeing the link between these classifications of nature is to connect with nature in different ways, help us develop through the human journey. Indeed, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess I just need to agree with that. I think there's
it's a statement rather than a question, isn't it? Yeah.
It's great. And
a couple of other people with hands.
I see some hands.
Yeah, Fizar, is that how you pronounce your name, Fizar?
Hi Nigel, hi
Hello.
Rob. It's
Oh, yeah.
fantastic. I'm really sorry I caught the last part of your talk, but I just wanted to sort of say I was reading Gaston Birchlet, is it Birchlet, about the candle of flame, and he spoke about fire and the psychoanalysis of how it invokes reverie, you know, your imagination. And I was on my walk, and you know, this farmer had this beautiful fire that literally caught me in rapture. I've never seen a fire like that in real life. And the question that came to me was, what is nature trying to tell us? Like, is there a message that we're supposed to pick up? Are there different messages coming from different things like winds and waves? And but the question was, what is nature trying to teach us or tell us? Is there something that is trying to capture our attention?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you. And I would, I think Bill Plotkin would say that it's very much a personal thing, in a sense. Like you've really nailed it. You've hit the nail on the head in terms of nature. Nature connects with us, or in a sense, you could say, speaks with us or engages with us through our imagination. So it's like that. You gave a beautiful image of the fire, and I can just imagine how the fire might bring my imagination into things, and when it touches us like that, it might take a little bit of investigation or a little bit of listening, you could say, internally to get a sense of what's being, you know, in quotes, said, because nature doesn't necessarily speak in words, the more in images through our imagination or through a felt sense, or how it moves our heart, you could say. So that's a brilliant, thank you for that. Does that help? Great.
Yeah, it's a bit.
It absolutely does. Thank you. No, the other thing I wanted to quickly ask was, does it expect the appropriate reaction from us as well? Like when we see a waterfall, are we meant to go wow? And is it injustice if we don't? This is another script I read somewhere. It's like nature invites us to react appropriately as well.
That's such a good question. It's because in a sense, I'm not sure Bill Plotkin would say anything about an appropriate response, because it's just a matter of allowing my natural response. And it would be hard to imagine someone not saying wow. So, but you know, but it might evoke a different type of wow. You know, it might say, oh, I really know I should have more flow in my life, you know, in a sense, like I need to be bigger if it's a big waterfall, or I need to, you know, something else. It might give me some inspiration in a particular direction, particular to myself.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I'll come to Irene in a minute, but Louise has said in the chat, perhaps the rest of nature and her synchronicities are trying to guide us back to our soul? ?
I would just take the question mark off and put an exclamation mark.
Definitely agree.
Yeah, definitely. That's you could say that, you know, I think you're sort of really getting the sense of what I'm talking about now, in terms of the flow of nature flows through each and every one of us, and in a sense, it's when we catch that inspiration or those insights, that is, you know, in a sense, we're talking about, that is nature speaking through us, you know, so it's not us doing something to nature, so to speak. So fantastic.
I think just to comment on that, I think, you know, we live in times, and we've come through history where as human beings we've seen nature as something apart from us, where we've exploited it, we've tried to control it, And I think we need to readjust, don't we? We need to realise that we are part of that, not only from the point of view of, you know, understanding the way that ecosystems operate and the importance of them being maintained and developed, but just from the point of view of our own health and well-being as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what it brings back to mind is the definition of soul basically being one's ecological niche. So it's like, for me, you can erase the term soul if you don't like it, but just use like, what is my ecological niche? What is my deepest way of belonging to this planet?
Yeah, yeah. Irene, you've got your hand up. Been very patient.
Yes,
Over to you.
Irene, thanks for waiting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually about 3 conversations below, and actually Nigel touched
Sure.
on what I was trying to say, and that is human beings, and you know, that's whether you're agnostic or religious, or I think whatever your sort of belief system is, human beings are at the center and in charge of everything that's around us. I think that's how most human beings look at things. But I think when we say we're part of nature, to me that is a connection with nature, because we're saying we are part of nature. We're not better than you. We're a part of that jigsaw. There's a sense of equality. So yes, we might, you know, sort of move on this earth differently than, say, other creatures or the weather or fire, for instance. But I think when we, as you mentioned, how we frame this, in terms of how we look at it, you know, at the moment, what comes across a lot to me is, well, you know, sort of relationship with nature and mirroring certain things with nature. But it's what I'm saying is, shouldn't we be looking at nature and saying, right, we are part of it. We are equally valuable, just as, you know, we're not more valuable. And we, you know, perhaps we need to stop seeing ourselves at the center of it, but completely as a crucial part of that whole system.
Yeah, that's
you know, so it's kind of taking things back sort of quite a way and saying, right, that's to me would be sort of the framework to which we move towards.
It's that idea of being indigenous again, isn't it? Really, I suppose that's.
Well, I've always understood indigenous as coming from that area. You know, you are. I mean, if I think about indigenous plants, which obviously plants my area of expertise, so it's things that come from that area. So yeah, no, I wouldn't particularly use that we're indigenous in terms of nature. I think it's very simply we are part of nature, but we tend to think we are as human beings that we are better than nature, and nature is there to serve us, rather than we are part of this whole ecosystem and we all play an intrinsic and valuable part together.
Yeah, Louise has actually said in many indigenous peoples' history, they believe human beings to be the youngest relation of all the rest of creation, like how we are youngest from an evolutionary perspective. So that's another angle on that as well. Rob, we've come to 2 o'clock. Did you want to have just a final comment and maybe say something about where we go from here?
I'm just really happy that we could just start this conversation. This is you know, I mean, today's talk, I've taken something from 3 different books, so it's like it's a huge amount of I've taken off quite a chunk to talk about here, but happy to continue this conversation again if there's interest for it. I run workshops. Ecotherapy East offers workshops that obviously gives a bit more space to unpack this stuff and look a little bit more closely at what one's place in world is. And and I'm just more than happy to be in touch with people. Hopefully when Nigel shares the stuff, he could share my contact information. And
will do. Yeah, thank you very much again indeed, Rob. It's been a really interesting hour, and you've crammed a lot into that time, and have opened up some very interesting, I think, lines of discussion. What I propose to do following today is to send around a link to the recording of the session to everyone who's been registered. Some haven't been able to get here today, but they have registered. also with a copy of the slides that Rob kindly used as well. And maybe just ask you in that email whether you'd be interested in some sort of follow-up session, perhaps thinking about towards the end of September. I think being realistic about holidays and things like that. And as Rob has said, I'll certainly put his contact details in the follow-up email. So thank you all very much for being with us today. I think it's been a very interesting 1 hour. And as I say, we've opened up some very interesting lines of inquiry and discussion. Thanks again, Rob. I hope you all have the rest of the day a very happy one. I'm going to stop recording now